To order. We are going to hear one bill today. That will be Senate Bill 214 by our esteemed Vice Chairman Harper. And I will turn it over to you, Senator, to present your bill. Oh, actually, I missed the most important thing. Let's start by blessing it. I'm going to ask our wonderful Senator, Reverend Jackson, to do that, please.
Let us pray. Holy God, we thank you for the opportunity to pause, to recognize that you are with us. We ask that you would guide us, give us wisdom, help us to carry out our responsibilities to be lawmakers in this great state. Give us wisdom to care for all. Amen.
Amen. And I want to thank Senator Jackson. We actually got to talk even before she was assigned to the Public Safety Committee, and you've asked some just incredible questions, especially for being a newer legislator. You really bring just great wisdom to this committee, so thank you. Appreciate it.
I tell them all the time, the future is bright.
It is very bright. I know.
So it's great.
You should have said that before Senator Robertson got here, though, you know. This is not Senate banking. But I'll tell you what, if you just give us your login and PIN number, we'll take care of it for you. That'd be great. Thank you. All right. All right, meeting called to order. Now we're going to turn it over to our Vice Chairman, Senator Harper. Please take us away for Senate Bill 214.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Senate Bill 214 I know it's got a lot of language in it, but it's in my opinion it's fairly simple. It would prohibit during a state of emergency any on the state level or on the local level from restricting the use of or the sale of or it will prohibit the seizure of weapons or ammunition in this state. It would also prohibit the suspension of weapons carry license that are legally authorized under the law if they're legally obtained. It would prohibit anyone from refusing to accept those applications just because we're under a state of emergency. It would prohibit the closure or limit operations of stores that primarily sell weapons and ammunition. It would also prohibit the closure or limiting of shooting ranges and would prohibit restrictions on quantity of sale of weapons or ammunition. So basically that's the heart of what the bill does. So it's a prohibition that during a state of emergency that could not take place. If it does take place, kind of the action step to prohibit it from happening, so to speak, is we create a cause of action, which you'll find on page 5, where if that happens, the entity or the person could file suit to claim damages in violation that were in violation of this particular code section. And then you'll find section 3 is to be able to file that cause of action, we have to waive the sovereign immunity, which is in section 3, and that's what the purpose of that is for. And the reason I didn't start in section 1, I actually started in section 2. I should have said that. And then section 1 is dealing with the powers of the governor, and that would address that the same way that we do local entities in section 2. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the basics of the underlying bill. I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Senator. I do have a question. Actually, I got a couple of lights up. Wow, I got number 6 lighting up. I don't think that's you. I think you're number 8. So go ahead, Senator C.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would you pull the microphone over to you, Senator? Thank you.
I sure will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oh, God. Okay, just start, okay. Let me just say, given the COVID-19 pandemic and the stress associated with unemployment, food insecurity, gun violence, isn't this bill poorly timed expansion which would make Georgians significantly less safe right now?
I assume you're directing this to the bill's author, is that correct?
Uh, I'm just floored, Mr. Chairman, but yes, I am.
Okay. Sounds like a question, Senator Harper.
I actually don't think it's poorly timed. I think it's perfectly timed because we are still in a state of emergency. And we have seen across the country and in other entities and locales where local governments have used their authority under the Emergency Powers Act to suspend, sell, and to suspend certain operations of gun stores and to suspend issuance of weapons carry permits. And it would only be applicable to that single business. It was basically they were singling out those entities just because of what they sell. So we don't think, because normally under normal circumstances, when you're not under a state of emergency, you don't have that authority or that power to infringe upon those rights, those individual rights, and the rights of the citizens of this state when it comes to the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and even the Second Amendment version in the Georgia Constitution. But under a state of emergency, governors and local governments have unparalleled authority when it comes to suspension of individual rights, and we're just trying to protect one that is in the Bill of Rights, which is one that I consider a sacred right that we have as American citizens and as Georgians, and that's what this addresses. That's what this attempts to do, and I think that this is a perfect time to do it because I think now is a good example of us. We've now been under a state of emergency for almost not quite a year, but we're knocking on the door of a year. So you're looking at. There could be down the road. There's future possibilities where it could you could get into situations where certain entities or individuals or government officials could use their unilateral authority under the Emergency Powers Act to violate someone's constitutional rights, and that's what we're trying to attempt to address and make sure that doesn't happen.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Chairman, are you saying that the gun industry is to maintaining Georgians' infrastructure during this state of an emergency as law enforcement, first responders, hospital workers, and other working to serve to protect our communities?
I think it's important that we say that we protect the constitutional rights of our citizenry. I think that's what this bill attempts to do, and it does do it. It protects those constitutional rights of individuals, and I think it's also, quarantine's a perfect example. There's a lot of things you can do during quarantine. One of them is you can hunt and fish. We have a lot of hunters in this state. It's it's a huge economic driver for this state, and if I can't go buy ammo at the store, I can't go hunt. And if we're under a state of emergency and it's ruled that is something that you can't buy, I think that is a violation of those individuals' rights to exercise not only their constitutional right but their ability to exercise their freedoms.
I'm gonna stop there, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure there are some other questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Just to let everybody know, it's lighting up for microphones 6 and 7 where nobody is. So, yeah, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand because I think some of these are not numbered appropriately right now. So I've got Senator Jackson. I'm going to light up number 3. Please talk for a minute and see if that one works or not.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Okay, that works. Okay, good.
Senator Harper,
Yes, ma'am.
First I'm going to begin by saying most good hunters always have ammo, and so if you find yourself short of ammo, you can come by my house and get some, okay?
All right. That sounds good.
But I do have a question. This says emergencies of any kind of nature. So would that include like a natural disaster, say a hurricane, a dam breach? Would that be included under this
Yeah, so it would be any
state of emergency?
any state of emergency that is declared, yes.
And so you say here that you cannot refuse to accept a license, a weapons carry license.
If that business is, if they are open and operating in normal business hours, you can't refuse to accept that. That would be the intent of that. There has been cases where the entity was open, but they refused to accept weapons carry applications.
Sure. So can you show me where, though, it says that they have to be open?
Well, it doesn't say it in here, but it's kind of hard to accept a weapons carry permit when the entity is not open.
Right. So, but I want to just be clear. Now, if I want to get a license to carry, let's say it's been a major flood. I don't know if floods happen in DeKalb, but maybe it did. You're saying that if they don't give me a license for weapons to carry because they're closed, but it doesn't say that's an exception, that I
Well,
can turn around and sue for damages?
No, you can't. No, that is not what this says. I'll read the language.
Will you help
Refuse
me
to
out?
accept an application for a weapons carry license provided that the application's been properly completed in accordance with Code Section 1611-129. So as long as you do the proper documentation and you properly complete it and you do it all in accordance with the current code, which would also imply that you're filling out the proper paperwork and you're turning in the proper paperwork, that if you refuse to accept that paperwork, and the only way you could refuse to accept that paperwork if you were open and doing business at that time, then yes, you would have a cause of action.
But Senator Harper, it's just not clear here that I
Personally, I think it's common sense that it is
to
evident
me,
that
common sense is
the only way that you could accept an application is if you were open, for business. I mean, you couldn't go get your hair done at a hairdresser if they were not open for business, so it would be no different than here, and so it's if the entity is open for business, then they would not be able to refuse the permit application.
Sure. I understand what you're saying, but it just doesn't show it here. I believe that this gives me a right that if DeKalb County decides to close their offices because, let's be more realistic, a tornado came through, that as long as I've filled out the paperwork correctly and I go and those doors are locked, that I then have the power to sue because they have essentially refused me. There's nothing here that makes that carve out that you keep talking about that says they have to be open.
But a refusal is not, that's not a refusal. If the door is closed and I'm not open for business, I can't refuse you if I'm not there.
Is closing the doors not a guaranteed refusal, essentially, de facto? Are you saying they have to say out of their words, I refuse to accept this?
I would. I mean, that would be the way that would be.
A little more
Hang
clear.
on,
That's all I'm asking.
A little bit of order for everybody. This is not an interactive discussion. It's a chance for senators to ask the author of the question. So we'll do a question at a time. We'll allow the person to respond if that's okay. All right?
Sure.
So, Senator, do you have another question for the bill's author?
That's good for now.
Okay. All right. I've got Senator Robertson next, and I've got you after that, Senator Jones.
Senator Harper?
Yes, sir. I'm coming.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes.
Senator Harper, I hate to admit this, but I'm not completely familiar with the county that you represent where Osceola is located.
Yes, sir.
So could you tell me what county that is, please?
It is Irwin.
If I were a resident of Georgia and I moved to Irwin County, where would I need to go to get a carry permit if I chose to do so?
In Irwin County, you would go to the probate court.
Okay, and where's the probate court located?
It is located in the courthouse.
Okay. Is there a particular time that they're open at the courthouse that I could go and get one?
I believe they're open 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, other than state holidays or federal holidays.
Okay, so if I showed up at the courthouse on Saturday with my complete form, would I be allowed to reach out, contact the probate judge, have him come down there, read my stuff, maybe, and me be able to surrender the fingerprints and everything else I received from the law enforcement agency that took my prints and
No.
submit them?
You could not.
Okay, so looking additionally at your legislation, if there's a business in Irwin County that has signage on their door saying that no firearms are allowed in their business, do those business owners lose that right just because there's a declarative emergency?
No.
So if I show up and they have that sign on the door and I go inside during an emergency, declared emergency, and they recognize that I have a firearm, and that business owner that owns that property, and he asks me to leave, do I have to leave?
I would argue that private property owner has the right to ask a patron to leave, yes.
So does your legislation here take the rights of any business owner that
It doesn't
chooses not
take-
to have weapons on?
That's a good question, Senator Robinson. I see where you're going now. This bill does not take away any rights of any private entity or private business on their own private property, no.
So during a state of emergency, if I show up at your house to visit and I'm carrying a firearm, do you have a right to ask me to leave your house if you're not comfortable with me with a firearm there?
I have the right to ask you to leave. That is correct, yes.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that.
Or I would still have the right, I should say, if this passes, I would still have that right, yes. Yep.
And my question was, this does not change any of the rights that we have today as far as private citizens to
No.
exercise our rights as business owners or as residents and
Nope.
homeowners
Doesn't change any of
to
that.
manage? Okay.
No,
thank you.
sir.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Was there any thought about putting a time limit on this? Because, okay, you had this pandemic last a year, so I'm not in support of it, but I understand what you're trying to do. So this pandemic lasted a year. Was there any thought of saying, okay, well, you know, if the state of emergency lasts more than 6 months, then we'll kick this in? That's my first question. And the
Yeah.
second one is, doing war and acts of terrorism, did you think about that might be going a little bit too far to include war and acts of terrorism? So those are my two.
So to your first question, and actually I respect that I guess not offer suggestion. You know, there was there really I would say that there really wasn't any conversation around a time frame or putting a timeline on this. I personally, and just this is me speaking, Senator Jones, I believe that this should be applicable regardless of the timeline of the state of emergency. We could have that debate and we can have that discussion. That's just my personal opinion. I think it should apply regardless of the length of time of the state of emergency. But to your point, though, I think the almost year-long state of emergency that we're under is kind of what has kind of brought this to the forefront and is I guess somewhat necessitated the proposal from my perspective. To your second question, in a state of war or terrorism, I would argue that any state of emergency that we shouldn't be using an emergency power to restrict an individual's constitutional right. I think those restrictions are reserved to a court of law or a judicial process, because in the court of law and a judicial process, you take away an individual's constitutional rights through a jury of your peers and through a court case, and you have the right to be judged on your actions, and most of the time those rights are taken away from an individual because of an action that they took. When you're in a state of emergency, I as an individual didn't take no particular action in any regard that would cause, in a normal case, a due process to happen that would take away what I would perceive as my constitutional right to exercise a certain right that I feel that I have. And I think this whether unintentionally or intentionally, would have the ability to take away a person's right without that process, without that due process that you could have. I would also say that over the last 10 or 15 years, we've not been in a state of emergency because of war or terrorism, but we have been in a war on terror, so we've been in a situation in both, and where that has happened off of our shores and overseas. I think at any time, if that ever was to come upon our shores, I know personally I would want the ability to protect my home and my property, and having the ability to exercise that right and be able to use this and be able to access these items that we're talking about in here, I think would be important during that time for me to have that ability to protect myself, to protect my home and to protect my family. I hope that answers your questions on my line of thinking on this, and but I obviously appreciate your knowledge, especially in the court of law, you being a former prosecutor, and but thank you.
All right, Senator Summers, I've got you lit up here. Is that you for a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It says 11 here, but it says 10 there. Senator Harper, simplifying this just a little bit, would this not be just a real bipartisan bill if we looked at it very simply? For the simple reason that if a governor, no matter what party the governor may be or what party is going on at that time, and something bad happened, what do you want to call it, natural disaster, war, whatever you want to call it, citizens have the right to protect themselves. And wouldn't it be that this bill would give them the right to go buy that ammunition or buy that stuff, or if Senator Jackson ran out, we could go buy ammunition or whatever, buy a gun, whatever you had to have to protect yourself? Isn't that basically what you're saying here? That the governor can't restrict you at that point in time, no matter who the party person is?
That's what this does, Senator Summers. Yes.
I would think that would be. I think everybody would be on board with this. Personally, I like this. Thank you.
All right, I've got Senator Lee Anderson.
Senator, if I understand this bill correctly, really all we're doing is giving a citizen the right to do what they have been doing their whole life, as long as they are a law-abiding citizen.
That is correct. It would, yes, definitely. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you would be able to continue to exercise the rights that you have that are guaranteed by the Constitution of this state and the United States.
And also, it gives a law-abiding business to continue doing their business and bringing in revenue.
Yes, it
for
would
the state of
allow
Georgia.
a law-abiding business to continue to do their business and not be unfairly targeted because of a certain product that they may sell. But it also further does not impede any other business, as the interaction I had with Senator Robertson, from making their own personal decision on whether they want to open or close or exercise their rights as private property owners.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, isn't it important for public health officials and judges to be able to make critical decisions during states of emergency in order to limit widespread infections and/or casualties here in Georgia?
I do believe that that's the case, and I think that's the reason we're in the situation we are now with the state of emergency that we have. We've given those public health officials, and working with coordination with our governor and Dr. Toomey and her staff at DPH, that authority to make decisions that are that benefit the health care of our state, and I think they've done a real good job in response to the coronavirus, and I just want to commend our governor on working and making sure we keep our businesses open and as best we can, and let them make individual decisions upon themselves as to whether or not they think their business should remain open or remain closed. And I think that's the reason we find ourselves in the fiscal situation we are in as a state is because of the decisions that our governor and this administration has made in that regard, and I think they've done a really good job at it. So to answer your question, yes, I do believe they should have that ability, and I think they've done it, and I think they've exercised that authority quite well.
Follow-up, Mr.
Go right ahead, ma'am. Could you pull the microphone over to you so we could hear you? Thank you.
Sorry. Aren't we setting up our public officials for failure by mandating they operate normally when that may be impossible to do during a state of an emergency?
Can you repeat that question one more time, Senator C? I'm
Alright.
sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I got my mask on.
Oh, it's,
so I was
it's
trying
fine,
to-
yeah.
Aren't we setting up our public officials for failure by mandating they operate normally when that may be impossible to do during a state of an emergency?
No, ma'am, I don't think we are setting them up for failure because we're not hindering their ability to address certain needs that are needed during a state of emergency. This doesn't hinder public officials. This only ensures that individuals have the ability to exercise the rights that they're guaranteed, and in no way can anyone, any entity or government entity suspend or revoke that right unilaterally just because we're under a state of emergency, and that's what this is about.
Okay, okay, Senator Jackson, and then I've got you.
So I want some help just understanding kind of your worldview here. Is it your belief that the governor under emergency situations should not be able to close any private businesses?
That's actually a good question. I think the governor has to be careful in exercising the authority that they have, especially when it comes to private business owners, yes.
So I'm asking this because you keep saying, guns were being kind of picked on, but there were a whole host of businesses that were closed.
There were situations in other areas, not necessarily by the governor of this state, but by local entities and then governors in other states and entities in other states where certain entities were singled out, yes.
Okay, and then just piggybacking on Senator C's, so I know in my county, there was a pause in the license to carry because our state requires that fingerprints be taken.
Mm-hmm.
And by necessitation of taking your fingerprints, it required very close contact, physical contact between the person who takes the fingerprints and the person who's receiving it. And so they chose to prioritize people who've been arrested as opposed to just a regular citizen who wanted to get their license to carry. And so would this bill punish DeKalb County for making that choice to protect their, it happens at the jail, right? So these are county employees. Would this bill punish them for choosing not to do the licensing because it required that close contact?
Well, I think now, I don't know how every county does it, and Senator Robertson may be able to speak this better than I can on how that fingerprinting process works. I know some counties have the ability to do it where you turn in your application for a weapons carry permit. Other counties may not. I don't know how there's 159, there'll be 159 differences. Okay.
I'm speaking directly about DeKalb County.
Okay.
DeKalb County I know, and that's the process I'm very familiar with.
Okay.
So it's not the licensing process. You fill out the paperwork,
Yeah.
right, and you just hand it. But in order to get your license, you have to be fingerprinted.
Yes, and that was what I was referring to when I meant licensing. Maybe I should have used the word fingerprinting.
And so in DeKalb County, the way they do the fingerprints is that it requires you to go into jail and they actually put your fingers, and the person helps you to get that full circumference. And so DeKalb County, given the health threats, health concerns of that type of close contact, decided that was a health risk that they did not want their employees to undergo. So would this bill punish DeKalb County if they made that choice in the future?
I think if they unilaterally made the decision to not fingerprint any individual. You have to get fingerprinted to do a lot of things. I'd have to go back through the code and look at everything that we require you to be fingerprinted for, but to be a
Certain healthcare workers.
worker, you have to get fingerprinted. To be a
Attorney.
you have to get fingerprinted. To be a child care provider, you have to get fingerprinted. So my answer to that would be, there's a variety of things under Georgia law that requires the fingerprinting process, right? One of which being through the application of getting your weapons carry permit. It's also required. I would think that if they're and I don't know the situation in DeKalb, and I don't know what their decision was. I can't speak to it. If at that time they decided that they were going to quit fingerprinting solely for the purposes of issuing weapons carry permits, that's one discussion. If they decided that they were going to quit fingerprinting, period, that's another discussion. And I think this opens up two conversations in that regard. What this attempts to do is to make sure that you're not solely singling out that if you're that fingerprinting process would obviously have to continue with the way that this is worded, yes, because that's part of the application process. But what we have seen is that in cases that was singled out, while other entities may have continued through the process. I know that may or may not quite answer your question, but I think that's kind of the baseline behind this, or the thought process behind this. Yes.
Yeah, 1 second. I was just going to check the back of your microphone there. There's a button at the very base of it in the back. I just want you to press that button. Then click it.
It should work now.
It was on, yeah.
Okay, that's all right. The Secretary of Senate's going to come over here. We're having some microphones are having issues, Senator. But
You got her on number 3?
yeah, the 3
Okay.
doesn't even come on in my system. So. Oh, hang on. Yeah. Oh, there. All right, let's try it again.
Oh, is this working? Oh, there we go. So just, I want to make sure I'm understanding you, Senator Harper. Basically, you're saying it's no fingerprinting at all. If you're doing no fingerprinting at all, you're clear. But if you're doing fingerprinting for some, you have to do fingerprinting for all. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I think so, but I think to be fair to your point, and I'll have to read in context to make sure. I think I would have to figure out if that would be just a blanket refusal or not. If you're saying that we're not doing any fingerprinting at all, I think it could be argued that would not be a refusal of an application, but you're not providing a service that you have to obtain to even apply to get that application refused. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
So I think if you're not providing that service at all, it's a blanket. The service is not being provided. I think that it would not fall in that category of refusal.
Okay.
I would argue that. But if that is being provided,
For
then
other-
you can finish the fill out of the application. You can't finish the application if you can't get fingerprinted, right? But you also can't single out one entity from not getting fingerprinted. That's the way I read this.
Yeah, but 6 was lighting up when she pressed her button.
Don't push the button.
Okay, all right.
Just raise your hand.
All right, we're gonna stick with the raise the hand method moving forward. Okay, we're gonna move over to Senator Robertson next, then we got Senator Jones.
Thank you. Senator Harper, if listening to your response, I've got four probate courts in my district. No one being fingerprinted for firearm, background checks, or this many other permits and applications that you must be fingerprinted for, no one goes to the jail to be fingerprinted. They go to the courthouse where an ID tech fingerprints them on an inkless fingerprint system, thanks to technology. So what you're saying is if the probate judge says everybody has to call in and schedule an appointment during a state of emergency to be fingerprinted for daycare worker, for the firearm permit, and for these many other professions and occupations that require background checks, then if he or she looks at all of those as individuals needing fingerprints, not at what the purpose of the fingerprints are, because once the fingerprints are taken and turned in the application, then they go through GCIC, NCIC, and all that for the background check. So there is no permit issued at that time. Or if that individual probate judge says, you know what, we're shutting down all fingerprinting, then you don't feel that if they shut it down all, then they would be in violation of what you're attempting to do.
I don't feel like they would, no, to
But-
answer your question.
Right. But if they selected a particular, saying this isn't as important, that isn't important, if they make a self-determination as a priority, then they very well could be
Yes.
in violation.
Yes.
Okay, and all of the inmates and arrests, all that fingerprinting runs 24/7.
That's
And the
correct.
business fingerprinting runs for 8 to 9 hours a day.
Yes.
And so as long as it's consistent.
Across the board.
Exactly, so that wouldn't be an issue.
That would be the way that I interpret
Right.
this. Yes.
And second question, if you don't mind, when this body gave the governor the ability to close businesses, and when the federal executive orders came out, and when governors from around the country decided to close businesses down, was it the governor who determined what was essential and what was not essential?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, if the governor of that state chooses that a particular store that sells ammunition or sells, according to your language, other personal weapons, which I assume to be knives and other things, but he or she would make the determination of what was essential,
That's
as
correct.
opposed to coming in and cherry picking or just shutting everything down completely.
Yep.
And so the essential business decision would be entirely up to the executive based on the powers granted to that person by the General Assembly.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to my time, before I was talking about the time of the pandemic, now as we're going through this, the time of maybe the order that would actually restrict this. Because when y'all were talking about closing businesses, it made me think about 9/11. We never would have thought that we would have to shut the airlines down, but it was necessary. We can't sit up here and anticipate what may be going on. But could we say, look, for a period of 5 days or 10 days, whatever may be happening, we got to get control of it, have that emergency order for that period of time. And then, have you thought about it in that sense?
Senator, that's a good question. To answer your question, I guess I haven't really thought about it in that particular scenario. I think we could sit here and probably come up with hundreds and hundreds of different scenarios that could arise. So I don't know that I have a really good answer to your question, other than I think what we're just trying to attempt to do, and I'll go back to, and I know I may sound like a broken record, but we're just trying to make sure that folks continue to have the ability to exercise the rights that they have that are guaranteed by the Constitution, and that we're just trying to protect those rights that they have, regardless of what that emergency may or may not be. But maybe you and I can talk offline about that a little more in detail.
Okay.
Question from Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Senator, on a Sunday afternoon, do you have the ability to purchase a handgun?
If the certain businesses open, you would, yes.
But that same Sunday afternoon, if you wanted to get a carry permit,
No,
you could not do that.
because, you know, normal business hours of a government entity would not be open on Sunday, typically.
So, I mean, so your bill change does nothing to change that. You can still go on Monday. to
You
get-
could, yeah, you could still go on Monday to
It's
get
not
it.
restricting governments, it's
No.
not doing anything, it's just literally just saying the law is the law and the law should stand.
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir.
Anybody else have questions? Okay. Do we have anybody here today signed up to speak on the bill? There's nobody here, and the sign-up sheet from here looks to be empty. So with that, I'll leave this open to the will of the committee.
Mr. Chair, I will make a motion to pass.
I've got a motion to pass from Senator Robertson, a second from Senator Anderson. Is there any further discussion from the committee? Hearing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed, like sign. 1, 2, 3. This bill passes. Best wishes and rules. Senator Harper, is there any other business to come before the committee today? Seeing none, this meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you for your time.